So when we think, I think it's been easier than normal to think about history lately, right? Because we've been celebrating the 250th anniversary of our country. History has kind of been a little more public than normal, right? History for most of us, unless you happen to be like me, is like a subject you didn't like in school and you try to avoid history. But this summer we've had to think about it. And we even have things like that bell upstairs. You can't walk in and out of this building without seeing a bell. And you're like, why is there a bell? History. History's why, because it's the 250th anniversary of our country. And I wonder if you've ever taken time to think about, why do we celebrate milestones like that? Why even pay attention to history at all? Why take time to think about what's come before? Why not just press on into the future? Isn't America the land of the pioneers who moved to the West without even looking over their shoulder? Think about track. When Amy and I helped with the Cranberry Fun Day this last May, we were down at the track, which was my favorite part of the day. So I was glad to be there. And we were there all day watching kids run around that track. And you watch like a first grader run a 400, you're like, you don't know what you're in for. That's a long lap, okay? Pace yourself. But here's the thing you notice when you watch kids run on a track. Kids are always looking over their shoulder, especially in a longer race like the 400, to see, am I ahead? Is he gaining on me? Which, if you've ever coached track or anything like that, that's the last thing you're supposed to do. Never look over your shoulder in track. You should never look over your shoulder. Sometimes we're tempted to live like that in the Christian life, or just in our life in general. I don't even want to think about the past. I'm looking ahead. But you see, life is not like track. Not in that way, at least. In life, we need to look back. We need to remember what came before, where we came from. And the reason I would argue that we need to do that is not just because history matters, but because God actually tells us to. God shows us that history matters, right? The God of the Bible is the God of the present and the future, yes, but he's also the God of history. And he encourages his people to regularly look back, to remember where they came from and who they are. History helps us remember where we came from and who we are. It's interesting, actually, that really, if you think about it, Judaism and Christianity really have kind of created, in some ways, Christianity helped create the Western modern world, a world that cares about history, because other religions, they think you're just going to die, come back as a butterfly. If you're lucky, it could be something worse, right? And you're just going to be in this cyclical process. Well, if you're in a cyclical process of reincarnation, history doesn't matter that much. But if you're a person coming from somewhere, currently in some place, going to somewhere, and history itself is moving toward a goal, not just some Darwinian, I hope we evolve, it's moving toward a goal, then history actually matters a lot. And that's the kind of world that the Bible tells us we live in. So if that's the kind of world we live in, we need to actually learn how to cultivate the spiritual practice of remembering. And this is not just nostalgia, by the way. It's not like us saying, I remember when gas was less than $1. I know, you're like, wait, what? Some of you are like, what? Yes, I can even remember that. I'm not that old, right? Remembering history is not just good old days thinking, right? That's what the Israelites do. They have good old days thinking when they're in the desert, and they're like, remember in Egypt, there were cucumbers and onions and garlic. They must have been desperate. They're like, onions, that was so good. That's good old days thinking. Because guess what good old days thinking does? They didn't remember something pretty important about Egypt. There were also whips. There were also people saying, if you have a son, we're going to kill him. No, they remember the cucumbers. That's good old days thinking. It's like you thinking back, life was so good. Name your year. Yeah, and also kids got polio and sat in iron lungs, right? Life wasn't all good back in the 50s. The greatest generation, life wasn't all good for them. They fought in a horrible war. Their kids got polio. And if they were lucky, they were just crippled. Good old days thinking misses things. That's not what I'm calling you today to. Good old days thinking. Right? OCV has an anniversary. 10 years. Praise God. But I'm calling you to think about that in relation to who God is and what he's done and where he might be taking us. But it's not good old days thinking. Because here's what good old days thinking does. Man, it was so nice when there were like 30 of us in a little circle in the transit building. Oh, I loved that. It felt so good. Yeah, and there were how many people in town that had never heard about Jesus? Right? Good old days thinking misses things. Good old days thinking usually is about us and not about the mission of God. So we're going to try in this series to think back well, to practice the spiritual discipline and practice of remembering without nostalgia, but because we're on mission. And our history is part of that mission, just like it was for God's people. Now, we're going to turn in just a minute to Genesis 12. You can start going there if you want. I will tell you that the first sermon series I ever preached at OCV was about mission. And I'm pretty sure it was Genesis 12. And by the way, we have now crossed the line. The first time we ever met in our living room on Innis Street was on August 14th. I had to go back in Google Calendar and find out what Sundays were in August, because I knew where it was in the month. I just wasn't sure what the date. It was the 14th. And I preached a series on mission to the 8 adults other than us gathered, and the 6 kids that were in our partially, and by partially I mean very partially, finished basement. All right? Those kids made it through. 3 of them were mine. Amy was probably teaching. But we talked about mission. You see, one of the things I never realized when I was younger was that mission doesn't just start in the Great Commission in Matthew 28. And if you've been around here for long, hopefully you know this. Hopefully you've heard me say this enough. But some of you are here for the first time or haven't been here very much. Mission doesn't start in the New Testament. It doesn't start with the Great Commission of Matthew 28. It doesn't start with Acts. It starts with the movement of God towards humanity. It really starts in Genesis 1 and 2, when God does all this good stuff because he loves us. And he says, go be fruitful and multiply. But we really see it kicking into high gear in Genesis 12. Now, one of the things we have to do when we want to think well about the story of God in the Bible is to read the Bible as the story of a people on mission and really a God on mission. It's so often we read the Bible like a bunch of proof texts meant to encourage us and help us kind of get through, right? It's like that 5-hour energy you get on a long car ride just so you can keep your eyes open as you're driving. I know someone that has had to do that a few times. Right? That's what we use Bible verses like so many times. Like, just get me through this. Okay, what's the one on perseverance? Okay, there it is. What's the one on joy? What's the one on, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Okay, great. Those are good verses. But we need them in context of the story. The text of the Bible demands context. And the story of God is something that moves through the entire text and his mission. And he's always drawing his people into it. So that's what I tried to emphasize in the first ever sermon series at OCV. And that's what I want to return to this morning. Genesis 12. It's a familiar story. We talked through Genesis last summer. Some of you may remember that. But this is one of the places where mission takes a defining movement. This is a hinge chapter in the Bible. Everything changes after this chapter. Just like when it says, that she bore a son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes. Everything changes after that. Like, there are these hinge moments in Scripture. This is one of them. Now, the Lord, this is 12:1. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I'll show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram went. That changes everything. And you've heard me say this, but I'm just going to say it again because we can't forget. Abraham was what? Blessed to what? Be a blessing. Right? Why are we going to try, by the way, to throw a party, invite as much of the town as we can get there? Because we are blessed. Why? Not just for ourselves, not just to have a little shindig with our friends, to be a blessing. We're always, always, always blessed to be a blessing with that blessing. It starts, we see it early on when God says, I'm going to choose this one person. You might say, how's that fair? There's one family, God, there's all these families in the world, and there's one family and they get chosen? Sure, that's pretty cool. Abraham's family gets chosen. One, and this is how God works, for the sake of the many. It's not one for the sake of the one. It's not like, me and my kids, we're going to be good. It's one for the sake of the world. Jesus Christ really lives that out. But Abraham was an early indicator of God's method. This is the beginning of the nation of Israel. And there's a whole journey, and we won't go into it today. And Abraham and Sarah didn't think they would have kids, and then, they did, and they had one, and Isaac then had Jacob. Jacob had 12, the 12 tribes of Israel. This births a nation. But they can't ever forget about this idea that they're blessed to be a blessing. Now, they didn't fulfill the mission perfectly, not even at the beginning. Abraham didn't fulfill it perfectly. Right? There's this thing in the Bible about imperfect people that God still loves and uses. Thank the Lord. We saw that in David's story. They had all kinds of trouble carrying out the mission. Right? If your organization has a mission statement, which maybe you've noticed that we don't really have one here. I don't know. I'm just not corporately minded like that. We basically love God, love people. That's good enough for me. Because how many times do you have a mission statement? If you can't remember it. Or if you do remember, you're like, we're not actually carrying half of this out very well. Right? This is how this stuff goes. Well, the people of God had a mission statement, right? Follow God and take that blessing and bless the world. And they don't always follow it out that well. In fact, before long, they end up as slaves for 400 years. Think about that. 400 years. How long has America been a nation? 250. That feels like a long time. It's been about 400 years since the Mayflower came over. That's a long time to be slaves. 400. I thought we were blessed, God. How are we supposed to be a blessing as slaves? God eventually hears their cry, and he frees them. And what does he free them to? Well, the first thing is to worship him, right? That's what Moses asked Pharaoh. Let them go out to worship their God. But he also frees them to step into the mission that God's given them. Now, here's the easy thing for us to do. The easy thing for us to do, just like it was for Israel, is to forget that we're on mission with God. Right? To think it's just about me and my happiness. Right? We live in a country where we've just codified that. The life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is like, here I go, pursuing my happiness. That's not in the Bible. Thomas Jefferson, pretty good dude. I found the University of Virginia. I like that part. Also some bad things in his life if you dig in very deep, right? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. American, not biblical. The biblical pursuit is the pursuit of God and the pursuit of what he has for us. And so when God answers their cry in Egypt, Moses leads them out of Egypt across the Red Sea to Mount Sinai, and God gives them his law. Right? He establishes a covenant with them. He had established one with Abraham based on circumcision. Abraham was his follower, his people. But then with them, with the law, he said, if you follow this, I will bless you. And if you reject this, you will encounter pain and suffering. But he doesn't just give them a law. So turn to Exodus 19. And a lot of this is review, but these are important things to put the story of Israel together, to understand how their mission is a through line, not a happenstance, moment by moment thing, but it's a through line of Israel. So in Exodus 20, God gives them the 10 Commandments. But in Exodus 19, he gives them some background for the commandments and for who they are. He speaks into their identity. right? God's not giving them abstract rules divorced from relationship. Sometimes we like to do that. Here's a rule. Why? Just because I say so, it's divorced from relationship, and I have power, you follow it. God's not doing rules like that. He's not arbitrary like that. His rules are all about relationship. First with him, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and then with your neighbor. Which, by the way, love your neighbor yourself comes from Leviticus, right in the heart of all these laws. Right? Love God with everything. Love your neighbors yourself. And that's what these rules are. They're in that relationship, those relationships. But God wants to remind them who they are. And they are a people on mission. Look at Exodus 19. I'm going to start in verse 1. On the third new moon, after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, 3 months. 3 months. They're not long separated from slavery. On that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain, Mount Sinai, right? While Moses went up to God, right? The people are below, Moses goes up to talk to God. The Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, "Thus shall you say." So he says, Moses, go back and tell them this. "Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." Yes, they have. They've seen the 10 plagues. They've seen the sea part and swallow up Pharaoh and all his legions. They've seen that. "Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among the peoples, for all the earth is mine." God's re-upping this. You're going to be singled out. You're going to be my special treasured possession among all the people. Right? Now, the thing we want to do with that is like, yeah, we are. Better believe it. But listen to what God says next. "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel." God reminds them. I said we're working on the spiritual practice of remembering. We've heard a lot in recent years about spiritual formation and spiritual practices and disciplines. I hear about prayer and Bible reading and, all kinds of things. I don't hear much about remembering, actually, in that discussion, but I think it needs to be there because there is a spiritual practice of remembering. And God reminds them what they've seen him do. And they've seen him do a lot. And he reminds them then who they are, which is actually even more important. We like all the big, showy things when God does something really big and undeniable. But what we really need to know more than any of that is who we are in him. God explicitly calls them to look back at their recent history, right? "You yourselves have seen," he says, "what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." Remember it, he says. He's calling them to remember their history. And he's also calling them to remember an older history. That of Abraham, who was blessed by God, called out by God to what? Be a blessing. And what's he say? You are going to be my treasure possession. I'm calling you out from the earth. Why? To be a kingdom of priests. What do priests do? Priests, by the very nature of that call, are meant to be mediaries. Helping people far from God connect with God. That is what a priest does. That's what priests still do. Pastors, to some extent, do it too. We're trying to help people connect with God, making it easier for people to connect with God. And by the way, is it ever about the mediator? It's not. They're just helping others get to where they really need to go, God. He says, you're going to be a nation of priests. All of you. See, everybody gets to play. It's not a new idea. You are all going to be a nation of priests, he tells Israel. Help the world see me. Live a holy life so that people see a holy God in it, Moses says. Their actions in the present, their actions in the future, everything about them, their very identity are rooted in this past. They can't forget it. What God said to Abraham, what God did in Moses, what God tells them here. It's essential for them to remember it well. See, God cares about how we remember the past. That's why all through the Old Testament, not just here, but as we go forward, there are numerous places. Psalm 78 is all about remembering, and when they forget, it goes poorly. The psalmist rehashes all this. I don't have time to read it today. One of my favorite ones that I read often, that I really like, is Psalm 103. I'm just going to read that quickly, the first two verses. You don't have to turn there. It's very short, what I'm going to read. This is one of David's Psalms, and it says this: "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that's within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul." And then here's the line: "And forget not all his benefits." Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. If we could live that out, how much better would our lives be? Just not forgetting the benefits that God's already done for us. How much less complaining? Ever tempted to complain? Ever parents have children tempted to complain? I don't know where they get it. I don't know where they get it. How much more gratitude would we have if we actually forgot not God's benefits to us? And honestly, how much less proclivity to sin would we have? Have you ever thought about this? That it's really a lot harder to sin when we're grateful. Think about that. You're far less likely to sin when you're cultivating a grateful heart. What does most sin come out of? I want it, and I want it now. God owes me this, and he hasn't given it to me. I don't care what way God says. I want this thing now. I'm doing it my way. None of that is gratitude. If we cultivate a grateful heart, our chances of being able to say no to sin go way up. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. In fact, we see this modeled so many times, even in Israel in the Sinai wanderings. Right? They end up wandering for 40 years. Why? Because they don't cultivate a grateful heart. Over and over, they're said to be complaining. And guess what they do? They forget about God and all his benefits. They take matters in their own hands, and they end up basically having self-inflicted harm done on them over and over again. Gratitude. And it comes from remembering what God's done. I guarantee you, no matter how bad you think your story is right now, no matter how worried you are about the future, that God has done things for you. That he has sustained you in hard times. That he has given you breath in your lungs. That he has given you at least some people in your life that care for you. Those are benefits of God. Don't forget about them. And the gratitude that you allow yourself to cultivate will help you say no to the lies of the enemy. See, history, as one of my mentors used to say, is very important. And this is this Psalm 103 or Psalm 78, only one of them. I'm going to end with one more passage. And it comes from Joshua 4. So go ahead and turn there. We're going to be there for a couple minutes. So if you know how these early books of the Bible go, you know that in Joshua, by this time, Joshua 4, Moses has died. And the people actually cross after 40 years of wandering, when all the parents die that complained against the Lord, who said, God, you can't take care of us. You're going to let our kids die in to these enemies in the land you promised. You can't take care of us. Well, no, God actually says, okay, I'll show you what I'm going to do. All your kids are going to see it, and you're not. And that's what ends up happening. So their kids, with Joshua, go into the promised land, and they cross the Jordan River. Now, the Jordan River at certain points is pretty small, but here it's swollen. They couldn't have crossed all these people as it was. They needed something. They needed intervention. So let's read Joshua 4, 1 through 7. And just to summarize, because we don't have time to read it, God says, here's what's going to happen. When the priests pick up the Ark of the Covenant and they step foot in the water, I'm going to stop the Jordan, and you're all going to cross. All right, so this is the second time in a couple books of the Bible where God has made dry ground appear out of wet. So the priests step in, they hold the Ark of the Covenant in there on the poles, the water stops, all the people walk through, then the priests leave and the water comes back. When all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, take 12 men from the people, from each tribe a man. Command them, saying, take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you are lodged tonight. And Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God in the midst of the Jordan, take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, when it passed over the Jordan, and the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. Now I'm just picturing this. One time I was at a retreat, and the speaker, he was preaching on that passage in Revelation where it says, like, you're going to get a stone with your own name on it. And he said, okay, he just had to show us he could do it. And he brought it and laid it down, really proud of himself. I'm just envisioning this. You know, they pick out these 12 guys and they're like, all right. And what are they going to do? They're going to set it over here and make a memorial. It must be something somewhat high, because when their kids see it, they're going to have questions. Right? Why is that there? Now, you might have thought, well, that was just like a throwaway line, like when your kids ask in times to come. But what I love about this passage is the author makes it clear this isn't a throwaway line, because look ahead at verses 19 through 24. The people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they encamped at Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. And he said to the people of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in times to come, what do these stones mean? There it is again. Then you shall let your children know. Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over, so that all the people of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. Wow. God says, we're going to make a memorial because your kids want to know. And you better be ready. Remembering, we see a few things about remembering, the spiritual practice of remembering here. One, it's a collective, multi-generational act. What happens if we don't bring the younger generations along? They forget, or they never learn to begin with. Do you know how often that happens in all kinds of things in life? Do you know how often it happens in faith? See, most of you here, I would assume, want your kids to grow up in the Lord. And here's my question. What memorials in your life do they see that they keep asking about? Why did you do that? Or what does that mean? Or why don't you do this thing that everybody does? And you say, here's why, because we follow the Lord. How many times? Those are the ways you teach a younger generation how to follow the Lord. When they see something different, when they see something that looks out of place, and you say, here's why we do that, because we're living for a different purpose. That's how you pass on faith. When your kids see you live it, and they ask questions. We think you pass on faith by bringing them to church. Yes, that's important. But here's the thing. Hey, Mom and Dad, all my friends are missing church this week to do this travel whatever or this or that. Why don't I? Well, let me tell you why we don't. That's a memorial stone. Mom and Dad, why do you put money in the Jif can? Why don't we just buy whatever we want? Let me tell you why. That's the memorial stone. And you have your own, right? Maybe you've been through a sickness. Maybe God's redeemed your life out of addiction. You have these stones, and your kids will see them, and they will ask about them, and are you ready to answer? And if you don't have those stones, I think it's not because God hasn't worked in your life, it's probably because you haven't taken time to cultivate it. You passed through the Jordan, and you let those stones lie, and there's no memorial, and you forgot about it. God said, pick them up, put them over there, and when your kids ask you, be ready. Multi-generational. This is a memory device, right? Physical things that jog their memory. Our God is a God who works in the spiritual and the physical, and sometimes we have physical things that jog our memory. Right up here, a physical thing that has a spiritual reality too, and it jogs our memory. And parents, I can't teach your kids what this means. Guess who's supposed to teach them what this means? You. And if your kids are coming up to get communion, guess who's responsible for telling them what in the world they're doing and what that memorial means? You, not me. The same will be true of baptism next week. I will do my best to communicate what it is, but parents, if you've been baptized, if you have that memorial in your life, tell your kids about it. So this memory is in a relational context, and there's responsibility. Right? 2 times it says, when your kids ask, tell them. We have a responsibility. By the way, high schoolers, you're not off the hook here. When your friends ask, I'm just going to say, why you live differently, are you ready to tell them? College students, the first thing is you have to live differently. Right? If there's no memorial stones in your life, no one might ask you any questions. You might wonder why. If you're living differently, people might ask, why don't you do that? Why are you committed to this? Some of you think, I can't evangelize, I can't tell people about God. No, live a life where people ask you questions and you'll find that you can answer them. And people can get a glimpse of God. We're not ever to just remember alone, or at least in this passage we see we're not always to remember alone. Yes, turn it over your mind. Meditate on His Word day and night. Meditate on the goodness of God. Create a heart that forgets not His benefits in your own heart. Yes, but there's times where we need to remember together. By the way, that's a little bit of what happens on a Sunday morning when we sing these words together. And we remember, we are not alone. Not only are we loved by God, filled by His Spirit right here, but we are with His people, His Spirit-filled church. And then we remember, we're not just in this room, His people. His people are all over. And they're all over, not just in the present moment, but in the past and in the future, and forever they will be together. Remember together. Pass it on. Younger generations want to know. Kids in high school who are younger, your friends need to know. They may not even know they want to know yet, but they're dying under a striving mentality of trying to be better and better and better, but eventually you can't be better enough. How does this apply to OCV? I think it's pretty clear, but I'll make a couple points. We got to remember our history. Not in a like the good old days, remember. Remember, why in the world do people plant a church at all? It's not because, we're trying to do our own thing or get away from this. Only good reason to plant a church is because you think God's A, called you, and B, you want to help more people know the goodness of Jesus. That's why you do it. No other reason is worth anything. God calls you and you want to see the name of Jesus praised by more people to experience how good He is. So that means it's never about our little holy huddle and it feels good in our little group right now and I'm just happy right now. No, we're always inviting. That's why you throw a party and spend a lot of money to invite the town, because you're trying to invite. You got to remember what motivated you in your early days. Even in the last few months, I've had a couple moments where God just took me back to like my high school days when I really gave my life to the Lord and was just on fire for him. And in my mind, he's just reminding me, remember your first love. Remember what it feels like to do this because you love me and you love people. You can't remember that enough, and I can't either. Remember what motivated you. And remember what God has done. Did you catch how they said that in Joshua? Look at verse 20 again. 21. And he said to the people of Israel, when your children ask their fathers of these things to come, what do these stones mean? You shall let your children know, Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. And here's what the important part. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea when he dried up for us until we passed over. When we remember his power in our lives, that we're his people and he is the one that does it, not us, that memory is powerful. The focus of this remembering is not on us. It's not on the priests or on Joshua, not even on Moses lifting his staff over the Red Sea and they're holding it up, right, so they can all get over it. Moses' staff is not what part of the Red Sea. Moses lifted his staff because God told him to. Hold it up, and the sea will part. But what part of the Red Sea? The power of the living God. What part of the Jordan River? Not the priests, not the Ark of the Covenant. The power of the living God. It's not about the priests, not about Joshua or Moses. It's not about us. It's not about me. It's not about Amy. It's not about our board. It's not about anyone here. It's about God and what he has done. And we're just grateful to be there, part of it. It's about God first and only secondarily on the thing that happened. The focus of the memory is God did it. Whenever we remember, it's easy to take the focus off God and put it on something else. This can happen in cases like remembering our history and our story. This can happen in your own family, your own story. It can happen, you start a business and it's tough, you're relying on God, then it gets really good, you do really well, and you forget. And when you tell the story, you talk about all the hard work you put in, and you forget, God did it. God helped you. God empowered you. That's called mission drift. And it's everywhere. Taking the focus off God, off God's mission in the world, is the fastest way to lose our footing. If you want to see mission drift, take your eyes off God. Take your eyes off. Love God with all you have and love your neighbor as yourself. If anything good has come through OCB, if anything good is going to come through OCB, it's because God has done it. It's because of his grace. Yes, God, this is the amazing thing. God is good enough. He's not like us. When we do something good, we don't always like to share the credit. When we do something good, we're like, yeah, look at me. But when God does something good, he's like, come along and be part of it. That's his goodness. And he lets us be part of this good stuff he's doing. He's good enough to let us, like Joshua and the priests, play a small part in what he's doing. But without God, those priests were getting swept away in the swollen river, and so will we. It was God, not any of their effort, that made the difference. And yet, God honored and used their obedience. And I would argue God still does. If you want to make the heart of God happy, we can't give him much. He doesn't need anything from us. We can't give him much, but I'll tell you what makes his heart happy. Humble obedience. Humble obedience. And somehow it's increasingly rare, even in the church. Humble obedience to what he says makes his heart so happy. It did then, and it still does. When we think about history, and the history of God's people, it is such an amazing story. We're just scratching the surface. God's moving still like he was then, and he calls us still like stop the river or part the sea. Our obedience alone will not do it, but our obedience is an offering we give God. Church in a small place, serve its neighbors in a way that helps change the story of their lives maybe, or even brings a little hope to the town. If that has happened in 10 years, it is because of God. In the future, it will be because of God. Let's keep sharing the memories of what he has done. Even some in this room may not know some of what, but staying on mission means remembering our history. It's true for your family, by the way, just as it's true for OCV, just as it's true for a country, just as it's true for the church at large. Remembering where you came from and who you really are in God's eyes. We've come from somewhere with God. We are right now somewhere with God, and we are going somewhere with God in the future. And that is our story, and that's what defines us as people, as individual Christians, and as a church. And so here's my question as we go. What's your story with God? What memorial stones are down in your life that your kids are asking you? Tell me more. And if you don't have that story, by the way, you can start it. You can start today and say, God, I want to be a part of your story. Come save me, redeem me. I want to follow you, and he will give you a story. As I say a lot of times, and I never get tired of saying it, God writes the best stories. He's the one that can see us individually and love us individually and also weave us into a big mosaic with others that is just part of something so beautiful you couldn't comprehend it. You can be a part of his family and his great story. And if you want that, if you've never done that, when we take communion today, there'll be people around the edges. Just tell them, I want to follow God. I've never done it, or I haven't been following him for a long time. I want to kind of start with God. Someone will pray for you, and that's the first step on that journey. And if you want to take a public step, come next week and get baptized. We're going to be upstairs in just a few minutes. Come up. We're going to have a very short meeting. Just tell you about that. But if you want to follow God and you say, this is part of that memorial I'm putting down, I want to get baptized, let's do it. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits.